Hey, everybody. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Tuesday. So much to get to today as the president digs in his heels on this trade war with China. We're looking at the developments with Iran over in the Middle East. And today we hit the campaign trail and take a look at a number of candidates that are out on the stump today, including one who stopped by The View here on ABC. We'll tell you more about that coming up. But we'll start today with a fact check of sorts on this trade war with China. The president unleashing a flurry of claims overnight on this back and forth on tariffs. We'll start with the first one today that he tweeted about. He says, tariffs have rebuilt our steel industry in the United States. He says, in fact, the steel industry is booming. Back in March 2018, he placed a 25% tariff on dumped steel from China and other countries. He says we now have a big and growing industry. We have to save steel for our defense and auto industries, both of which are coming back strong. So is that true? How much of that is true? And what are some of the challenges facing the economy? For more on this, I want to bring in Stephanie Segal. She's a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic International Studies, also former U.S. Treasury Department official here in Washington. Joins us now also with us Bob Woodruff, our chief foreign correspondent who's covered China, and also happy to have Gary Romeg, president of Summit Steel and Manufacturing from Reading, Pennsylvania. So we'll get to all of them. But let's start with Gary because we just lost Gary, unfortunately. So hope to have Gary back in a second. But let's turn to Stephanie for a conversation on what these tariffs have done on the positive side for the steel industry. Stephanie, great to see you. By one account, we've learned about 12,000 jobs have been added since these tariffs have gone into effect. That's a good thing, right?
Adding jobs is certainly a very good thing. I think you could make the argument that the job creation is as much a function of a strong economy, which is also, again, a very good thing. I think the problem is when you impose tariffs, what you're actually doing is raising the cost to the end users. And so we've had now a market that's being protected, and that might help with some of the domestic manufacturers. But the end users that are also domestic are actually facing higher costs. They can make a choice as to whether or not they're going to let the higher cost eat into their profits, or if they're going to pass on those higher costs to consumers, and that then raises the prices to the final consumer. I think the fear now with the tariffs being raised from the 10 to 25% is that producers are not really going to have the option of just eating that incremental cost. They're going to have to start passing on that cost to the end consumer, and that's going to end up hurting Americans.
It sure is. And Stephanie, by one estimate in the past week, which I'm sure you've seen, the Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated that for every steel job that was saved or created by the tariffs, U.S. companies, consumers, businesses will pay an average of $900,000 a year combined in aggregate total costs increase because so much relies on steel coming in from outside the United States. Is it true, though, that, as the president says, that the steel industry is booming and will continue to surge? Will we see a return to the glory days of steel of, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago?
I think those glory days in steel and a number of other industries are not necessarily coming back if we think of glory days in terms of the number of jobs that are actually created. And that's really just a function of automation, which has impacted the steel industry, but also a number of different industries. So to the extent you're able to encourage producers to onshore their production, they may well do that, but the job impact of such onshoring is really not what it was a few decades ago. And that's why policies that are incentivizing growth in traditional sectors are not really where the job growth is going to come from. Job growth is going to come from innovation industries. And that's really, we should be putting in place policies that are going to foster growth in those sectors because that's where we're going to have job creation.
So sort of a mixed picture on the president's claim on steel. Certainly jobs have been created. The industry is experiencing a bit of a resurgence, but in the long term, as you say, most economists agree that this is not a long-term investment industry in terms of major growth. Let's take on the second claim now and turn to our Bob Woodruff for this one, who spent a lot of time in China. Bob, we're going to put this one to you. The president tweeted overnight this morning, he said that China buys much less from us than we buy from them by almost $500 billion. So we're in great position. Make your product at home in the USA. There's no tariff. You can also buy from a non-tariff country instead of China. Many countries are leaving China, he says, and goes on to say that it would, in fact, be much more competitive for people to buy from the United States. We're a much bigger economy, he says. So, Bob, you've studied the Trans-Pacific trade relationship there. He does have it right that there's a pretty big trade deficit, does he not?
There's certainly that. Both sides are going to be affected deeply. All the experts tell you this is really the consumers and the businesses in both countries will be damaged by this, no matter what happens. I think we're not going to see the real numbers, the results of this, until China's tariffs also kick in and what the President of the United States, President Trump, decides to ultimately do. But these are two leaders, Xi Jinping of China and President Trump of the United States, don't want to give in. Neither one of them want to be the first ones to fold. And I think that is ultimately going to be the biggest fact that we need to know. Who's going to give up what for the other side? In the United States, we know that the prices will go up. The prices in China will go up, and amount of business in terms of import and export will go down because of these tariffs. Eventually, hopefully, they will be negotiated out. But we know that those in China are going to be filled with their own anger, as the U.S. Consumers will have a lot of anger. Maybe businesses on both sides will feel some kind of gain if it gets ultimately what they want. But in the United States, mostly it's politics that's going to affect initially. But in China, where there's not much politics in that system there, but I think the biggest fear in China is the effect within that country will be on potential uprisings. You know, China is right on its edge right now. It needs a significant growth economically. And if this slows that down, there could be a significant impact on the ground.
And certainly President Trump is hoping to use that as leverage to balance out that trade relationship. Both parties, though, as you alluded to, Bob, up on Capitol Hill, Republicans and Democrats are really sounding the alarm today about what this will mean for America's families, the cost they will pay because of this back and forth, which many lawmakers say in which nobody wins. Take a listen.
What should have been done is all of the allies should have been lined up to join us in the effort to put pressure on China. And because that wasn't done, in effect, American families got the brunt of all of this.
It has an impact. A lot of these, obviously the costs get passed on to consumers, so there are impacts there. There are clearly impacts on the ag economy. And we're feeling that in farm country.
So let's bring in Gary Romig now, who I think has joined us once his signal's back. He's the president of Summit Steel and Manufacturing in Reading, Pennsylvania. Gary, it's great to see you. We've had you on before. So we'll talk about the steel industry in a second, but since you're in farm country, you're just up the way, wanted to ask you, do you feel an impact? Do you worry about an impact these tariffs will have on prices that you and your family will pay?
I'm not so concerned about the cost to my family. I've had the luxury of being in the business for 30 plus years, and I've watched the disintegration of the steel industry throughout all that time, and the number of manufacturing jobs lost are more significant in my mind than the cost to the individual family when they go out and buy a product or two that has metal in it. I think we've lost so many jobs over so many years in manufacturing that you can't discount the company and the country's transformation over to China. In my opinion, we've industrialized China at the backs of most of the manufacturing in this country.
And Stephanie Segal, the tariffs on steel and aluminum that Gary's talking about, well, they certainly may be supporting that industry. GM and Ford, just as an example, both companies have said that they will cost them about $1 billion each to make cars, which in turn will turn to the consumer. And then there are these tariffs on consumer products. So it's not just the metals, but the consumer products. And you've studied this. The consumer products is where the biggest bite could be for families, right? The things that we pick up at Walmart and Target that come straight from China.
Right. I think China is certainly an exporter of a range of imports to this country. So, of course, the tariffs that are put on those items are going to be passed through then to U.S. consumers. But if I can go back to the point that Gary just raised, there's a very legitimate concern about the way that China does business and the fact that China is able to simultaneously protect its own domestic industry and then export excess capacity to the rest of the world and put a lot of unfair competitive pressure on the rest of the world. So there is absolutely an issue that the Trump administration has tapped into and is right to try and address. But as the quotes that you played back from Capitol Hill, it needs to be approached that is multilateral in nature, because the issue is one that is in fact global. And the way to maximize the chances of our success is going to be partnering with allies and partners to take on something that is a mutual concern in China.
And Bob, you know the Chinese better than most. We hear, again, members of both parties, we hear the president say they simply don't respond. They haven't responded to the WTO, years of pressure to try to equalize things and rectify some of these practices with IPO and other things. Is there anything that they would respond to short of tariffs? If tariffs won't work, what will work?
Well, that's a question we have. It's very difficult for us to influence within that country. In fact, if you look at all this controversy happening now in terms of trade, this is not going to be a trade. This is not hug trade. This is going to be war trade if this happens. But anyway, this is the biggest tool that the United States has right now in terms of how much we buy from them and how much we sell to them at what price. But the one that's not being raised at all in this potential negotiation or some battle arguments between the United States and China is they're not really raising much human rights as an issue. They would, everybody out there in the world of human rights would really like it if the United States does a lot more than it's doing in China. For example, we just got back from the province of Xinjiang in the northwestern part of China, where there's a largely growing horrific incident that's happening where China is going and really cracking down on the Uyghur people, which is the ethnic group, Muslim ethnic group in that country. Where they're pretty much denying them almost all freedom, and they're destroying their culture. If that continues to go on, this could be perhaps one of the most horrific human rights incidents in the United States right now. The U.S. has raised this with China, but in this negotiation process, these tariffs between China and the United States, they're not raising that at all. So that's certainly one of the most significant desires by those in the human rights side of this.
And Gary, real quick, Gary Romig, president of Summit Steel Manufacturing up in Reading, Pennsylvania. I want to give you the last word here. How would you like to see this end? How would you like to see this play out? Would you be happy if the tariffs went away now that the president has achieved some gains in your sector?
Well, I think for us as a fabricator in a transaction, it's a transactional price and passed on to our customer. Therefore, if it goes away, prices would go lower, but I don't know that it would have very much impact. Exactly the opposite is happening. We're having more potential customers hitting our website and coming to us from all over the country, and actually outside of the country now coming to us that 2 years ago wouldn't have considered it. So for us, it's a opportunity and a boom for us to find other larger customers who are worried about China and the ability to buy products from them. So for us, it's the exact opposite. It is an opportunity that we haven't seen in many, many years.
All right, Gary Romig, thanks for your perspective. Important to hear from you and your industry in Pennsylvania. Appreciate your time. Also, thanks to Stephanie Segal of CSIS, an economist. Great to see you, Stephanie, and Bob Woodruff, as always. Terrific to have our chief foreign correspondent with us here as well. Moving on now to the situation in the Middle East and that escalating tension with Iran. The New York Times reporting overnight that the White House is now said to be developing contingency plans for retaliatory and offensive strikes against Iran, including the possibility of deploying as many as 120,000 troops to the Middle East. Our Cecilia Vega just asked President Trump about this report on his way out the door. Here's what he had to say.
I think it's fake news, okay? Now, would I do that? Absolutely. But we have not planned for that. Hopefully, we're not going to have to plan for that. And if we did that, we'd send a hell of a lot more troops than that. But I think it's just, where was that story? In the New York Times? Well, the New York Times is fake news.
We fundamentally do not seek a war with Iran, but we've also made clear to the Iranians that if American interests are attacked, we will most certainly respond in an appropriate fashion.
So perhaps a bit of a carrot and stick statement there. The Iran supreme leader also put out a statement today saying Iran doesn't want any war either with the United States. There will be no war, the Ayatollah said. Resistance is the Iranian people's definite choice. Let's bring in our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez, for more on this. Louis, help us make sense of this after several days of escalating tension and tough talk, and then this sort of alarming report that 120,000 troops could be on the table here. You saw both sides say we're actually not looking at a war. That seems to be significant.
No, that's right, Devin. What we're looking at is contingency planning on the part of the Pentagon. They have a plan for everything, essentially. And so when you ask for military options for scenarios, you're going to get various military options from the military. So what we do know is that, yes, last week on Thursday, there was a meeting at the White House. Top national security officials, including the Secretary Shanahan here at the Defense Department. And what we do know, we're not sure exactly what the topic was, but the New York Times is saying that the topic was Iran, and that at that meeting, Shanahan introduced General Joseph Dunford, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that he then presented this option. Now, I think it's safe to say that this is probably the top line option for any scenario involving a conflict with Iran. And you would expect that anything like that is going to involve a large number of troops. But we should also put it into context as to how many American troops are already in the Middle East. And that is the number of 60,000 and 80,000 American troops all the way from Syria to Afghanistan. That's a large number. Now, what we're talking about is this option is maybe an additional surge, probably either sea, air, or maybe some component of land forces. But again, this is a scenario that the Pentagon is going to have to plan for at some point anyway, and in terms of if things escalate to Iran, which hopefully doesn't happen.
Yeah, and perhaps the leak of this contingency planning, which is quite common, as you say, Louis, was a deliberate move, part of this putting Iran on notice as we saw those bombers landing there. Real quickly, though, before I let you go, it's interesting with all the talk about troops and might concern some people that this is even on the table. I understand from some of your reporting that any strike against Iran would most likely be a missile strike or an airstrike first, right, before anything would go in. That would be the first indication of a conflict.
That's right, Devin. One of the key things that was noted in the New York Times story is that this is not about the 120,000 is not an invasion force of Iran. That's not how many you would need. It would probably have to be much larger scale than that, given the complexities of Iran's defenses. What we're talking about here is a scenario where you use standoff weapons. That's been the method of choice for the United States military over the last decade. This is where you launch missiles from offshore. This is where you use, again, aircraft to launch missiles from outside airspace, what we've seen in Syria with those airstrikes. So again, that would be the most likely scenario.
All right, Louis Martinez for us at the Pentagon, as always, standing watch. Louis, thanks so much for your reporting there. To the race to 2020 now, as a number of candidates look to jumpstart, reboot their campaigns, perhaps. Some looking to do some fundraising, others to come to grips with their weaknesses. The president, we know right now, is down fundraising in red state Louisiana, while one of his rivals, Beto O'Rourke, the Democratic former congressman from Texas, stopped by The View. All right, we lost our soundbite there, but Beto O'Rourke, the former congressman, did sit down with the ladies of The View today on the couch, had to come to terms with some of these questions about his campaign, and we do have that soundbite now. Let's take a listen.
You're right. There are things that I have been privileged to do in my life that others cannot. And I think the more that I travel and listen to people and learn from them, the clearer that becomes to me. When women in this country are paid 80 cents on the dollar that a man makes, African American women 61 cents, Latinas 53 cents. When you have 10 times the wealth in white America than you do in black America, when you have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, and it's disproportionately comprised of people of color, the systematic foundational discrimination that we have in this country in every aspect of life is something that I have not experienced in my lifetime.
Let's bring in now our Beto O'Rourke reporter here at ABC News. Sasha Pesnick joins us live from New York, where Beto O'Rourke is today. Has been fundraising overnight. Sasha, great to see you. So there are a lot of reports out there that Beto is looking to reboot his campaign. He has been struggling in the polls. How are things going right now for him?
Things are going well. You know, he has been lagging behind after sort of shooting out of the cannon on the announcement of his campaign. He's now lagging behind a little bit, but his team says they're going to continue to meet everyone, everywhere, and get their message across and keep learning from people.
Kind of pushing back on those reports that he's been struggling, and of course getting some attention there on The View with the ladies. He's also in New York City, as you reported last night, to raise some big cash. He talks a lot about a grassroots campaign, but he did rub elbows with some pretty high-dollar donors.
Yes, he did indeed. You know, he says that he will take any vote from anyone, and he's looking for all kinds of support from all over the country, no matter how rural or red, and I guess no matter the dollar amount, Devin.
That is for sure. There's Beto O'Rourke back on the trail in the coming days. We'll be following Sasha as well. Meanwhile, one of Beto's rivals, former Vice President Joe Biden, is in his second day up in the state of New Hampshire, the first primary state. It's his first visit up there. 5 stops in 2 days. Our Chris Donato has been on the ground with the Vice President. And Chris joins us now. Chris, Joe Biden is talking a lot about those debates that are just around the corner now.
You know, Devin, he came up to the reporters. He just ended an event in Nashua, New Hampshire, and he spent about an hour in the rain taking many selfies. And he came up to reporters after taking all those selfies. And one reporter asked him, you know, are you preparing for the debate? The first one is at the end of June. And he said, not yet. I haven't started preparing yet. But with so many candidates in the race, he says he's not quite sure how the debates are going to work out. And he says he's debated all his life, but he doesn't quite know how this one will shake out with so many candidates in.
Yeah, he's sure going to be in for something with that debate. Of course, he debated Paul Ryan back in the 2012 campaign, so has some experience on that stage. And Chris, before we let you go, the former vice president's also making some news up there in New Hampshire on the topic of Facebook. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, he did 5 events over 2 days, but he also spoke to the press at least 4 times during the 2-day swing through New Hampshire. In an interview last night that was released last night with the Associated Press, he was asked whether he thinks that Facebook should be broken up. And he didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He said it's an issue that we should really look into. So more policies to come from the former Vice President Joe Biden on the campaign trail.
All right, taking sort of a middle ground on the topic of Facebook, as many accused him of doing on climate change. Chris Donato, thank you for that. Facebook, though, really hot topic among the Democratic candidates this year, as many of them call for a much tougher line in U.S. policy against the big tech companies in the United States. Let's bring in now Zareen Shaw. She's another one of our new ABC campaign reporters, and she's been taking a look today at the breadth of viewpoints on Facebook among the Democrats. Zareen, great to see you. There really is a mix of views out there about what should be done with this company that was so critical in the 2016 campaign.
Hi, Devin. Yeah, a really big mix of reviews. You heard just what Joe Biden said last night, but this all really started because last week, Chris Hughes, who's basically the co-founder of Facebook, one of them, he came out with this bombshell New York Times opinion piece saying that Facebook should be broken up. Now, this guy was there at the very beginning, so it's a big deal. He's basically calling for Facebook to be split up from WhatsApp and to be split up from Instagram, calling on examples like the Russian interference in our election, hateful rhetoric, fake news. Facebook, of course, pushing back, saying that smaller companies just would not be able to put the kind of money that they're putting into things like security, and that breaking Facebook up just really isn't the solution. So you have a lot of people weighing in on this. First and foremost, Elizabeth Warren. She is calling for Facebook to be split up exactly the way Chris Hughes is kind of giving the example of giving WhatsApp its own space, Instagram separating that as well, and then splitting that off from Facebook. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, she is on Elizabeth Warren's side. She says that she wants, in fact, to introduce legislation in the House to support that idea. And then you have a bunch of people in the middle. But the most interesting is Pete Buttigieg. Now, this guy is number 287 on Facebook users, one of the first 300 people to have joined Facebook, but he says that they have too much power as well. Now, other people in the middle are Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, as you just heard, and then a whole other spectrum that we'll get into another time. But Devin, we'll throw it back to you for now.
Yeah, that's a great overview, though. But I mean, this is going to be a hot topic. They're going to be talked about it on the campaign trail, in the debates, of course. And a fun fact there on Pete Buttigieg, one of the earliest adopters of Facebook. Zoran Shaw, great to see you. Thanks for coming on the briefing room. Let's go out now to Montana. Let's stay on the campaign trail here in 2020, where Mary Alice Parks has just caught up with the newest entrant into the 2020 Democratic primary race, number 22, Mary Alice.
Lucky number 22. Good afternoon, Devin. I'm outside Helena High School here in downtown Helena, Montana, where the Democratic Governor Steve Bullock is about to have his first campaign event since launching his campaign. Now, this is a high school where he attended, and his daughter is currently in school. The woman that's introducing him today was in high school with the governor. She even introduced him to his wife. It all fits into this story of Governor Bullock as sort of a good hometown guy. He left Montana, but then came back. Even though he was a Democrat in a red state, he won to be the AG and then has been a two-term governor. He enters the race late, obviously, but this is a quirky fact. The legislature in Montana only meets for 3 months every other year. So they just wrapped up session, and the governor said that was just too important for him to miss. Now, obviously, this is a busy, crowded race, but he says that he has a unique appeal. He was the only candidate that was also on the ballot next to President Trump in a red state in 2016. And President Trump won in the state of Montana by 20 points, but he also won re-election that day.
That's going to be a big week ahead for Steve Bullock. And you caught up with him today, Mary Alice. When will we get to see a little more of your interview with him?
Yeah, it was really interesting. They gave us exclusive access in his kitchen with his kids around. He was in his workout clothes ready to leave for his morning run. We got to watch him sign his official paperwork to become a candidate in this race and to talk to us about just what that feels like. So that interview that I had with him will air tomorrow. We can talk more about it. But it was really exciting to tick through some of the policy ideas, but also talk about what it'll feel like to go from Montana to a nationwide campaign.
All right, fascinating stuff. Yet another Democratic candidate from a red state in this race, number 22. You have the exclusive stuff for us tomorrow. Mary Alice Parks, great to see you. Thanks for your reporting from Montana. Finally today, we want to pay tribute to National Police Week. It's a tradition started by former President John F. Kennedy back in 1962. It's been honored every year since in memory of those who serve and sacrifice our country as police officers. 42 have been killed in action so far this year. They were remembered last night at a memorial service here in Washington, D.C. And it's also being celebrated as a day to give back. Today, I caught up with some officers from the Metropolitan Police Department here in the nation's capital as they were doing just that. What are you guys out here doing today?
So this is something that I've deemed MPD Yard Crasher event. We simply pre-identify some military veterans in the Summer Crime Initiative geographic area, and being the month of May, it's a perfect time to start.
Yeah, beautiful day.
Beautiful day. It's Military Appreciation Month. We're coming up on Veterans Day, so we wanted to take the subculture of our military veterans here, most of which are seniors, and let them know that we appreciate them and that we want to give back to them.
The Metropolitan Police Department and D.C. government partners are about to crash your yard.
What does it mean right now to be a police officer?
We really want to show the community that we're more than just a badge. Every single day, we go above and beyond to give back to the community that we serve in every way we can.
Is it a tough time right now to be a cop?
Honestly, in the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C., I don't feel like it is. You know, we have had an outstanding relationship with our community going back 19 years since I've started.
What do you want people to know about police nationwide in this era? Everybody's so divided. They see the stories about cops
acting badly.
In the United States of America, we have over 800,000 police officers that go out every single day to serve and protect their communities and to do good things. It shows what we do every day in the community.
All right, our thanks again to Captain Bottler of the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, and a salute to all of those who serve our country as police officers and law enforcement officers. Thank you for joining us today here in the briefing room. Great to have you with us every day of the week, 3:30 Eastern Time here on ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you back here tomorrow.